So this paper is a good summary of how all of our Earth systems are breaking because it reports on climate parameters going up exponentially, but also consumption of resources, population growth, all of the other stressors that are going up exponentially on our planet. It's a good overview of basically what's happening, and it's not good news.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Climate Emergency Forum. My name is Regina, and I'll be your host as we discuss Planet Under Siege. Today, we'll be discussing a fascinating paper written by William Ripple and other scientists that discuss the state of the climate, and they call this Entering Uncharted Territory. It's a fascinating read, and we'll be sure to link it in the description so that you too can look at the paper that we'll be now discussing. The general gist of it is, of course, that things are not going well. If we look at the planet as a patient, the vital signs of that patient are severely, severely compromised. We see this through several different indices. For example, the Antarctic sea ice has greatly diminished since 1991. And now a lot of these figures are going to look at how things have changed from 1991 till now, which is relatively, of course, a very short time period in Earth scale. So one of the things that really threw me was the Atlantic Ocean sea surface temperature has gone up a great deal. And the world ocean, all of the oceans combined, sea surface temperature has gone up precipitously. Now, why does this matter? When the oceans warm, we have organisms that live and have lived in the oceans for millions, hundreds of millions of years that are adapted to specific levels of pH, to specific levels of salinity, and especially specific levels of temperatures. And when this natural balance is disruptive, it causes a tremendous amount of difficulty for those organisms who are not adapted to living in a warmer environment. Of course, we can turn on air conditioner. The fish and mammals in the sea cannot do that. Also, the world's surface temperature has gone up precipitously. And we can just look at this anecdotally and through our own experiences, understand that it's gotten a lot warmer. Today's Halloween here in New York City. Just a few days ago, I was out on a roof deck of a friend having lunch, enjoying the 80-degree weather. And of course, I use the word enjoying. It was enjoyable, but at the same time, I understand what's behind that unnatural warmth in October here in New York City. So while sea ice has gone down, while surface of the ocean temperature has gone up, what else has gone up? This is something that we talked about recently, which is food choices. Food choices have a tremendous impact on our environment, on our planet, and ruminant livestock, billions and billions of cows. As more and more people adopt the standard American diet, as more and more people see beef as desirable, we see more and more rainforest mowed down so that the cattle can graze in what was once a beautiful ecosystem so that we can buy our $1.99 McDonald's Happy Meals. So it's gone up tremendously. There's been a lot of forest fires, and we've talked about them. Most recently, the fires in the arboreal forest in Canada. So the tree coverage has gone down greatly. And in the last few years, especially, it has just nosedived. And when we lose trees to that extent, we also lose a portion of our carbon sink, because of course, trees take in carbon from the atmosphere. So there's a lot of things going on that are conspiring together to bring us to precipitative warmth. And I'm going to pass it on to Peter, who's going to share with us the history of this paper, its significance, and what it means for us and for the planet.
Thanks, Regina. So this was quite a paper, and it's got quite a history to it. So I found myself taking notes and covering the history. So that's what I'm going to present for you today. So the paper was published on the 24th of October. It was Climate Change 2023, and it's the most recent of a very important number of papers that were published by lead author William Ripple and other scientists. So this paper was published with the 11 other leading scientists. First, however, I want to mention a great loss to the climate change world community in the passing on the 28th of October at age 71 of climate scientist Saleemul Huq, because Huq was co-author of the World Scientists' Warning of a Climate Emergency and head of the International Center for Climate Change and Development in the University of Bangladesh. The Washington Post published a really good tribute to him as a Bangladeshi British scientist who gained renown for his efforts to make high-polluting countries help the world's poorest and most vulnerable states deal with the devastating impacts of climate change. Deplorably, the richest countries to this very day are still resisting meeting their obligations to the now severely suffering, most climate change vulnerable poor country populations. So, thanks in no small part to the warning of a climate emergency science publications, as of the 30th of October this year, climate emergency declarations have been passed in 40 countries, in 2,349 jurisdictions and local governments. So we are at least getting the word out on the climate emergency. So the outstanding leader of the World Scientists' Warnings, these papers, is William Ripple, who's distinguished professor of ecology at the Oregon State University. The peer-reviewed publications of the warning, since the first one of 2007, was something to me of a breakthrough for climate change action. Because ever since the first 1990 IPCC assessment, climate change science has stuck to a policy of, quote, not making value judgments, like saying climate change is dangerous, or being critical of the fossil fuel industry. Not till last year, 2022, did the IPCC chair, Hosung Lee, to his credit, refer to the dangers of climate change. And in his press release of the February 2022 IPCC Second Working Group report, he said, this report is a dire warning of the consequences of inaction. However, climate change awareness supported by science does go back a long way. And our story starts in 1992, when a majority of Nobel laureates in science published the first World Scientists' Warning to Humanity, which of course I read over again. Now, citing multiple increasing global environmental degradations, they had a long list. The warning included this quote: "We must move away from fossil fuels to more benign, inexhaustible energy sources to cut greenhouse gas emissions and the pollution of our air and water." 1992. Today, fossil fuel CO2 emissions have increased over 70% since 1990, and over the past 4 years, they're increasing faster than ever. And that was just released 19th of October this year. So in November 2018, Bill Ripple and colleagues were published on their World Scientists' Warning to Humanity, a second notice. So they updated the whole World Scientists' Warning of 1992. And it gained 15,300 scientist signatures in agreement with the paper from 180 countries. Subsequently, the Alliance of World Scientists was formed as a collective international voice of scientists regarding the global climate crisis and other adverse environmental trends, with the intent to turn accumulated knowledge into action. It has 27,000 subscribing members from 180 countries. Then, in November 2019, Bill Ripple and his colleagues were published on a paper called World Scientists Warning of a Climate Emergency. More than 14,000 scientists from 153 countries signed on to it. I don't know how many now, agreeing that climate change is an emergency that would, quote, lead to untold human suffering if no big shifts in action take place. So we did have actually some good news that I found in January 2021. A global United Nations survey found that 64% of people around the world know that we're in a climate emergency. So with the rapidly increasing disastrous impacts of the past few years, on the 12th of December 2022 came an update of the World Scientists Warning of a Climate Emergency called Climate Emergency 2022. And this paper said that we were now at a code red, as Antonio Guterres, Secretary General, had said, on planet Earth, and humanity is facing unequivocally a climate emergency, and that transformational system changes are urgently needed. Oh my, that's the truth. So this brings me to what to me is the most important comprehensive climate change update, published on the 24th of October by Bill Ripple and again 11 other leading scientists. And this paper, called the 2023 State of the Climate Report, Entering Uncharted Territory. The paper opened with life on planet Earth is under siege. Tragically, this has been the case for some time. The paper pointed out that we are entering an unfamiliar domain regarding our climate crisis, a situation no one has ever witnessed in the history of humanity. We are what the scientists have been telling us for a long time. Planet Earth is in a no analog state, what today's scientists are calling we're in uncharted territory. So the paper also stated, as the previous one did, and I was very glad to see this from a large number of leading scientists, they said it is the moral duty of our scientists and our institutions to clearly alert humanity of any potential existential threat and show leadership in taking action. And of course, global climate disruption is the ultimate existential threat to our future. So I want to just finish off by saying that making no climate change value judgments by scientists on the climate emergency today is the very worst value judgment by default. And that hopefully, for today's children worldwide and all future generations, all scientists will rally to this call, which has been supported by tens of thousands of scientists already. So thank you, Bill Ripple, and those tens of thousands or more scientists who have joined the Climate Science Alliance in taking an active stand on this climate emergency for our common future. There's the history.
Thank you, Peter. I really found that history interesting, and I appreciate your giving us that overview. But one of the things that you said that piqued my interest was you were discussing about the wealthy nations, the wealthy nations having an obligation to work with and assist those nations that'll be most affected by climate change. And one of the things I couldn't help, you said that 61% of the population understands that we are in a climate emergency. And I can't help but wondering who the other 40% of the people who disagree. And I hate to say it, probably a lot of them come from my country, United States. We have a lot of denial about climate change. But people who live in areas that are directly affected, that have been directly affected, don't have the luxury of that denial. They don't have it. If they live in the Middle East or North Africa or various parts of Latin America, that luxury doesn't exist because they're living with climate change every day, and they have been for years, and it's affecting them and will continue to affect them. So it's really quite abominable that one of the nations most responsible for this, of course, Europe as well. I'm not just singling out United States, and Canada has its fair share of guilt to shoulder, but to do wrong and to not at least acknowledge that wrong is such a complete evil. So what does that insinuate? That the people who are suffering aren't really suffering from anything. It's in their imagination. It's really just terribly cruel, and it's a disgrace. So I want to hear more about the science. Now that we've heard the history, maybe you can share some of the scientific aspect of this paper with us, Paul.
Thank you, Regina, and thank you, Peter. So the thing that really stands out in this paper, Scientists' Warning to Humanity, the latest version, along with the previous versions, is all of the graphs that basically show a line going up exponentially or even super exponentially. So it comes back to the human inability to really understand the exponential growth and the exponential function. And of course, we're on a finite planet. People know that, but because the planet is so large, people have thought that the exponential growth in various elements could continue going on basically forever. Economists talk about the supply and demand curves, that when a resource is more in demand, then we find additional supplies. But the earth is finite, and all of these exponential increases are reaching their limits. The system is on the breaking point, and we can actually see it start to break in many elements of the climate system. I mean, it's very important that scientists speak and put out papers like their warning to humanity, because as James Hansen has said for many years, there's this natural reticence in the scientific community, a reluctance to sort of step out and talk about how bad the climate is becoming. People get labeled as doomers, and when they're reporting on very alarming findings in their research, they're labeled alarmists. And it's totally different to be just showing the research findings that are very alarming versus being alarmist. But it's about time that scientists call a spade, and more of them are using the phrase climate emergency. If you look in scientific papers, that expression climate emergency has increased significantly. More and more governments around the world are labeling it a climate emergency, but they're not acting as if it's an emergency. Clearly, they continue to fund the fossil fuel industry at ever larger rates. And actually, a lot of the changes that we can expect by crossing tipping points are actually even much faster than exponential. It's just like a step function, or the mathematical function is a heavy side function. And we're seeing a lot of flickering, if you like, in the system. And this is where the system actually is about to cross this threshold to flip to a completely new state, very nonlinear behavior. So the system almost samples the new state. And you could argue that that's occurring in terms of sea surface ocean temperatures, in terms of the collapse of Antarctic sea ice, in terms of the temperature rise that we're seeing, which a lot of it is probably due to the reduction of aerosols. It's going to get a lot worse. Basically, we have not seen anything yet. We're just seeing early stages of a completely disrupted climate system. I mean, if you just look in the last few months, even, at some of the events that have just been unbelievable, is the torrential rain taking out 2 dams in Libya, basically destroying an entire coastal city. The wildfires that were in a drought environment with high winds in Hawaii, which destroyed a coastal town. And just about a week ago or so, the tropical storm, which then became a Category 5 superstorm hurricane, which destroyed Acapulco with almost no notice because of its incredible intensification. So, imagine a tropical storm off Miami, which suddenly intensifies in the very warm waters and becomes a Category 5 and takes out that city. I mean, we're talking about a Category 5 having a direct hit on a city of over 1 million people, a wealthy place with lots of high rises, a tourist place, completely devastated. And it hardly makes the world news because there's so many other things going on. So it's very challenging times, actually. It's challenging for a person to maintain any faith in humanity, given the massacres that we're seeing of men, women, and children. I'm specifically talking about in Gaza, refugee camps being bombed, hospitals. It's hard to maintain faith in humanity. James Hansen talks about a 0.18 degrees Celsius rise per decade up to 2010. And since 2010, a 50 to 100% increase in that rate. So 0.27 to 0.36 degrees Celsius per decade. And, we continue to have global climate conferences, but how much longer are, with all of the disruptions happening around the world, we're not making progress on these conferences. Just look at the rate of greenhouse gas rise, the exponential rates of greenhouse gas rise, whether it be CO2, methane, or nitrous oxide. It's Halloween tonight, and people can go around without costumes. People are scary without costumes. We're scary in what we're doing to the planet. We're scary in what we're doing to each other. We're scary in our disregard to the future. So this paper is a good summary of how all of our Earth systems are breaking, because it reports on climate parameters going up exponentially, but also consumption of resources, population growth, all of the other stressors that are going up exponentially on our planet. It's a good overview of basically what's happening, and it's not good news. So
thank you for that, Paul. I appreciate especially what you said about it being Halloween and how humans don't need costumes to be scary. I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that is so important about this paper and a few other papers that'll be coming out in the next few days is that scientists actually are speaking up. They're speaking up vociferously. Anyone who's watching this channel probably can remember even as little as 5 years ago, scientists weren't able to speak. And the way journalists covered the climate crisis was they had this notion that they had to keep the topic balanced. So they would present a scientist who spent his or her entire life studying the climate models and global warming, and they would pit that person against a denier, which is crazy, right? Because, say that we have a scientist who's talking about the spherical nature of the world. Would those same journalists say, well, wait, we need a flat earther on here. We have to be fair and balanced. We need someone who understands that the earth is flat. Of course not. Absolutely not. Yet somehow that applies to climate denial. So I'm happy to say in the last couple of years, the major news outlets, especially for me, the New York Times, the Washington Post, even mainstream media, they're starting to speak openly about the fact that we are in a climate crisis. It took them long enough. I think that they were complicit in feeding this whole denialism that has been so detrimental to any progress at all that we need desperately. So the good news is scientists, the muzzles are starting to come off. The bad news is that it took so long. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Peter.
So yeah, first of all, I want to say how much I appreciate Paul's recent video on the Acapulco and region cyclone. That filled a huge gap in the news. It was excellently done. Very, very impressive. Made the point very powerfully. So thanks for that. So in this paper, and of course, I'm only too aware of the fact, because I monitor on a regular basis these climate change indicators, of the fact that all of our indicators, and as Regina quite rightly points out, which is a health state of our planet Earth, all of these indicators are record high, and they're increasing at record rates, including our emissions. Now, the Bill Ripple paper, they give 35 vital signs. That's quite a collection. And 20 of those, they say, are showing record extremes. They point out that we are in a situation, as you both mentioned, of continued business as usual, the pursuit of business as usual. And this has led to, as they put it, unprecedented pressures on the Earth system and on all of the vital life-sustaining Earth systems. And again, they repeat what other scientists have said, which is that we're in what they call uncharted territory. Of course, the big hope is that this is a huge, huge contribution. I mean, I can't overstate the contribution that Bill Ripple and his colleagues, and Bill Ripple started it with just a couple of other colleagues. And now they've got this very, very large backing and support of tens of thousands of scientists. for the climate emergency. So what needs to happen is sort of painfully obvious. If there's not a huge, powerful intervention, then we are going to continue on this business as usual. Our governments are subsidizing the fossil fuel industry to the tune of $7 trillion a year. And there's only one future to continuing on this business as usual, record high, as I say, emissions of all the greenhouse gases. And that's a future which has been described as unlivable by the IPCC. It's a future of oblivion, the darkest dark that one can ever imagine. So what needs to happen? Clearly, the most influential, the most powerful, the most credible institution that can change this, of course, is the scientists, and hence the moral duty mentioned for the second time in this paper by Ripple and his other leading scientist colleagues. We must have the national academies and the royal societies of science stand up, wake up, and make a strong statement to the governments of what the governments have to do for our common future survival. Now, I want to finally point out this is their mandate. These organizations, the national science organizations worldwide, they're mandated to advise governments of serious scientific developments which are significant to their populations. And the situation with regards climate disruption is unprecedented, as is repeated over and over again. Scientists, please follow Ripple and his colleagues' examples, step forward, speak out, and tell governments what they have to do.
Speak out indeed. Why don't you close us out, Paul? Speak out about the science and what we should take away from this paper.
So this paper, just came out recently. And since it came out, there's been, a lot of very significant papers that all add to and talk about what's in the Ripple paper. For example, Stefan Ramsdorf, the head of the Potsdam Institute, very famous climate institute, came out with a letter just yesterday called Extreme Weather in Our Climate System, basically. And he talked about, it was a good review of the thermodynamic effects. With climate change and warming, we expect there's, of course, more water vapor in the atmosphere, more intense storms, increasing frequency of storms, etc. But there's also dynamic effects, which are kind of considered separately. And these are changes to global systems, like changes to the actual way that air moves around the planet with the jet streams, changes to the way that ocean currents carry heat. So the whole system, the whole climate system is rewiring, if you like. It's completely changing so that the resulting weather that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis is all affected by the trends in the overall climate systems. He wrote this excellent paper. The International Energy Agency released a massive report talking about the amount of fossil fuels that are in the system and about how renewable is making leaps and bounds, but it's on top of the fossil fuel infrastructure. It's not replacing it. So there's new science coming out on almost a daily basis. When I was doing videos and analyzing the climate system just a few years ago, I could pick and choose. Now it's like I'm always sort of behind the situation. I mean, I can't possibly cover everything. I can only cover a small fraction of what's happening. So I need to, apply my filters on, what's important and what's not. This is only going to accelerate in the near term future. We're already essentially at 1.5 Celsius. This will be realized over the next 6 months to a year. We're in a world that's at 1.5 Celsius. The El Nino effects haven't really kicked in yet. Towards the middle or end of next year, we'll be at 1.8 Celsius. This may back off 0.2 or something, 0.3, as the El Nino effects leave the system, but we're heading very rapidly to 2 degrees Celsius. A paper also came out just yesterday on carbon budgets. So it was the latest view on carbon budgets. And the work was done, I think it was submitted and published, but the way that, you do your research, you write the paper, you submit it, it gets peer reviewed. By the time things appear, papers come out, they're already outdated because the climate system is changing that fast. This paper on carbon budgets was what budget do we have before we exceed 1.5? And basically it's up. We'll be looking at 1.5 in the rearview mirror, in less than a year. So the acceleration of the trends that are listed in the Ripple paper and elsewhere are extremely, we're in the soup. They're extremely concerning. We can't talk about 2100 or even 2050. Stuff is happening now, and it's going to affect global food supply probably within the next 5 to 10 years. It's hard to see how it won't, especially when you get jet streams locked into this mode 5 or mode 7, and then you get multiple food producing regions around the world exposed to simultaneous drought. Then you have global food shortages, and we don't have a reservoir to carry us through these things. Basically there's going to be huge geopolitical unrest. So everything is sort of coming to ahead right now. We've lost the luxury of time, I guess, in fighting massive catastrophic climate consequences. They're here. They're here right now.
Thank you, Paul. Definitely, we have lost the luxury of time, and all eyes should be on adaptation, 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 and of course, add in a drop of mitigation. So I really want to thank you for sharing your thoughts, Peter and Paul. And I want to thank you, the audience, for being here once again for another show with the Climate Emergency Forum. If you've learned something, share the video, and if you haven't done yet, please subscribe. It definitely helps us with the algorithm. And we hope that you will read the paper. As I said, we're going to share it in the description. Please do check it out and share your thoughts with us down in the comments. We'd love to hear from you as always. And we'll see you next time at the Climate Emergency Forum.